A new nuclear device was dropped today on ETAOIN SHRDLU. He ran from the burning buildings, shouting, "ETAOIN SHRDLU!" It is the intention of the anarchists to remove the bodies of the ETAOIN SHRDLU. At the conclusion of the debate, Senator Stevens offered the following resolution. ETAOIN SHRDLU. ETAOIN SHRDLU. ETAOIN SHRDLU. ETAOIN SHRDLU. ETAOIN SHRDLU. What the heck is ETAOIN SHRDLU, and why does it keep popping up in all these old newspapers? Well, the answer to that question has a whole lot more of a story and a mythos to it than you might think. And it all starts with this little machine, the linotype. This thing ruled the newspaper industry for close to a century. Invented in the 1880s, this was what most big newspapers used to use to arrange all the words that would eventually be stamped onto their paper. Basically, the operator would use the machine's keyboard to punch in the letters, and then the machine would create big hunks of metal called slugs that would have all the words imprinted onto them. Then a separate machine could use those slugs to basically just stamp the words onto the paper. Pretty cool, right? The linotype actually used molten lead to cast the slugs. Like, it's a real interesting piece of machinery. Critically though, the linotype had a bit of a flaw that is very important for our purposes. See, there was no backspace on a linotype keyboard. No delete button, no real way at all to undo what you had punched in. Once you started a line, you had to finish it. Meaning if you hit the wrong key in the first letter of a new line, then you would have to fill out that entire line before you could start over and try again. So, over time, the correction process for messing up the typing eventually became pretty much standardized. If you made a mistake on a line, then you would just type out the rest of the slug, move on to a brand new fresh line, and then try again. And later, a proofreader was supposed to notice the incorrect line and pull out that slug before the newspaper was printed. Simple, right? But that still leaves one question. What do you type to fill out the rest of the messed up line? I mean, the obvious answer would just be to hit the space key a whole bunch of times, right? But actually, that would take quite a lot of time. Spaces are real thin compared to regular letters, so you just have to like jam on that thing a whole bunch to fill out the slug. So instead of spaces, most linotype operators would do something very specific to fill out the rest of an incorrect line. They would just run their fingers down the left side of the keyboard real quick, you know, like. Now, something important to know here is that linotype keyboards were not laid out like the keyboard we're all used to today. No, the letters of a linotype were actually arranged roughly in order of how common each letter was in the English language, meaning the keyboard looked a little something like this. So, when the operator ran his fingers down the keys on the left side, out came ETAOIN SHRDLU, a complete nonsense phrase, and something very recognizable as a mistake that the proofreader could notice later. If you always use the exact same phrase to signal an incorrect line, then it would be very easy to notice when something had gone wrong. For the most part, because as we've seen, sometimes the ETAOIN SHRDLUs would slip through the cracks and end up getting printed. Like, here is a great example that I found from 1916. The first line says, "Mr. A.M. Hawley returned home yes," and then the second line is supposed to say, "Today from a business trip." But the linotype operator accidentally wrote visit instead of business trip, so he finished out the rest of the line with ETAOIN SHRDLU and then tried again. But the proofreader must not have noticed the mistake, because he left in both the correct and incorrect slug by mistake. And sometimes it would be a whole lot more than just one ETAOIN SHRDLU too. Sometimes you would get whole heaps of gibberish, because a lot of times one little ETAOIN SHRDLU might not be enough to fill out the line, so you might have to hit a whole bunch of other keys too to fill up the space. And that's the story behind ETAOIN SHRDLU. But it's not the whole story. You see, ETAOIN SHRDLU evolved to become a whole lot more than just a simple printing error. Over time, ETAOIN SHRDLU almost became like an industry-wide running joke. It was such a notorious mistake that newspapers began to personify the phrase. They started treating it like a name, a person, a little trickster who would sneak into your print shop and mess up all your hard work. Like here's a newspaper in 1961 calling ETAOIN SHRDLU a little cuss, a gremlin that has plagued newspapers from the best to the worst for years. Here's one in 1935 calling SHRDLU the most exasperating jinx in a printing office, the original printer's devil. Here's another one calling him the best known comic character in the American press. And you know, we got a whole lot more than just a few sarcastic lines referring to ETAOIN SHRDLU too. Like, I cannot overstate how much of a common thing this was. Like, for example, here's a little cartoon that somebody drew of an operator typing out ETAOIN SHRDLU. And here's a comic strip somebody made where the joke completely hinges on you understanding what ETAOIN SHRDLU is. Here's a monkey at the zoo in 1954 being named ETAOIN SHRDLU. And here is my very favorite, a drawing of what sneaky old Mr. SHRDLU might have looked like if he were a real guy. Like, as you can see, ETAOIN SHRDLU was a very prominent feature in the world of newspaper back in the day. And now, pretty much nobody remembers it. Mostly because Mr. SHRDLU just doesn't have a way to infiltrate newspapers anymore. Linotypes began to fade out of use in the 1970s, and nowadays with computers and digital printing, there's really no reason at all why ETAOIN SHRDLU would ever accidentally show up on a newspaper page in 2023. Which is kind of a shame in its own way. Because ETAOIN SHRDLU had his place in printing history, and in my opinion, he kind of deserves to be remembered for that. And you know, I'm not the only one to think so either. You see, back in the 60s and 70s, as linotypes were phased out, a whole lot of newspaper editors and reporters, they saw the writing on the wall. They began to realize that their old mortal enemy, ETAOIN SHRDLU, was about to evaporate, disappear into thin air. And strangely, they felt just a little bit broken up about it. Obituaries for ETAOIN SHRDLU began to pop up in newspapers all around the country. Bittersweet farewells to the old trickster of the industry. ETAOIN SHRDLU passes on. The passing of ETAOIN SHRDLU came softly to us. We just woke up one day and realized he was gone. ETAOIN SHRDLU, a wraith who became a legend, was declared legally dead last week. Alas, poor SHRDLU, I knew him well, said one editor. We shall not see his like again, added a printer. Dear old sneaky pal, we will miss you. Shed a tear for ETAOIN SHRDLU. Let us mourn the passing of ETAOIN SHRDLU. It's great stuff, right? But out of all the ETAOIN SHRDLU eulogies, my favorite was written over half a century ago by a man named Ken Liddell. This is a tribute to a grand old man of journalism who is dying a slow death. He is ETAOIN SHRDLU. ETAOIN SHRDLU has found he is no longer needed, and what a pity it is. He had character and personality and was a good, quiet worker. Whatever else may be said of ETAOIN SHRDLU, and some pretty unprintable things have been said about him, he had class and character, and there will never be another like him. Goodbye. It's not uncommon at all for people or events to be remembered for generations, but cultural artifacts, industry secrets, unintentional relics of obsolete technology, those rarely stand the test of time. Poor old ETAOIN SHRDLU, he never stood a chance. The public consciousness has just passed him by. So do me a favor and pour one out for Mr. SHRDLU. Keep him in your heart. Thank you for watching.